Hello everyone, my name is Ryan. Welcome to the FME Desktop 2014 training course. For this course, I'll be showing the training manual on half of the screen. You can also have your own manual open on your own computer if you like. Something I want to mention right away is that FME is very large, so when I first mention anything, it may be without any real context. Here is some of the jargon I will be using repeatedly in the course and what it means. A feature is the smallest unit of data. It is an individual point, line, polygon, row in a table, etc. It is a city, road, lake, things like that. A feature type is a collection of features. Most software packages refer to them as a layer, or level, or tables, or feature class. We call them feature types. A data set is where your data is physically stored, such as a file, folder, server name, or instance name, etc. We will be using an inspector to look at data, to view the features in the data sets. Workbench is the program we will use to transform the data using a data flow diagram. The canvas is the part of Workbench where you create your data flow diagram. Transformers are the tools in a data flow diagram that filter features, change attributes, or change geometry. Finally, feature connectors are the lines that connect the feature types and the transformers together in your data flow diagram. So the manual that we'll be working through is the FME Desktop Basic Training Manual. So there's an introduction to the training pathway. We'll talk about the FME version and sample data. This training manual is meant for use with FME 2014, and the sample data, when you obtained a link to this recording, there should have been an indication as to where that FME data is stored. So again, my name is Ryan Craig, and I'm an FME certified instructor, and I've been working in the professional service department at Safe Software for the last 12 years. The goal of this course is to give you a good overview of the capabilities of FME Desktop. Due to the compressed timeline, we cannot cover all of the capabilities of the software, but we will cover the basic functionality, concepts, and terminology, as well as where to find additional information. This course is made up of 5 chapters. Each chapter takes approximately 90 minutes to complete, and is a mix of lecture and demonstration with some hands-on exercises. Within the manuals, you'll notice several different icons. Tips are additional advice. Cautions are warnings about things that can get you into trouble. When working through the exercises, there are also additional advanced tasks you can try if you want to try some additional functionality. If you have used FME before, the new icon will point out functionality which is new for FME 2014. And finally, Q&A or questions in the manual to help solidify what we have covered. The training data itself is kept, or is best kept, in FME Data 2014. Some of the workspaces have existing paths already in them. If you place it into a different folder, keep in mind that you may need to change the data set locations within the Workbench workspaces that we're playing around with. If you don't have the data is available for download from www.safe.com/FMEdata. So let's take a look at FME, the Feature Manipulation Engine. FME is a data warehousing tool for moving spatial data about to solve the problems of data interoperability. Interoperability is basically the ability to share your data. Not only can FME move data, FME can translate data to different formats, and also transform its data model and contents to meet a required output structure. This is why FME is sometimes called a spatial ETL. It can extract, transform, and load data. FME has a centralized model so that adding support for a new format is as simple as plugging it into the core engine. FME has a rich data model that allows it to support all possible geometry and attribute types, which allows you to compensate for differences in data type and format to create a seamless process which doesn't lose data. FME also allows you to transform and restructure your data during the translation process. When you install FME Desktop, it includes a number of different components. FME Workbench allows you to create your translation scripts using an intuitive point-and-click graphic interface. FME Workbench is the primary tool for data translations in FME. The FME Data Inspector is a simple viewing application that allows the quick viewing of any data supported by FME in any of our supported formats. It is used for data validation and QA by allowing you to preview your data before, during, and after a translation. For this course, we will be focusing primarily on FME Workbench and FME Data Inspector. There's also some additional utilities which are installed. The FME Quick Translator is the predecessor to FME Workbench. Up until FME 2011, it was called the FME Universal Translator. It can still be useful if you need to quickly batch translate a large number of files, for example, changing the coordinate system for a number of tiled CAD files. The FME Integration Console controls FME components embedded in other products, typically import and export utilities. Examples are the import and export tools in AutoCAD Map and Intergraph GeoMedia. The most fully realized application extension is the Esri ArcGIS Data Interoperability extension. This extender embeds Workbench and the Data Inspector directly into an ArcGIS. The FME Licensing Assistant is used to license FME. The FME Quick Translator and FME Workbench are both graphical user interfaces for the FME command line engine. The FME command line engine may still be used directly to run a translation, but this is typically only when running translations on a Unix-based platform or when running batch translations using a batch file. The FME Plugin SDK allows developers to develop their own readers and writers for FME. In addition to FME Desktop, Safe Software also offers some other products. FME Server allows users to run FME translations from a web page or stream spatial data to web mapping products without having FME installed on their own computers. FME Cloud is a pay-as-you-go option for FME Server. FME extensions are extra cost formats and transformers, usually sold by other companies. The FME Store is where you can add additional functionality or formats to FME. Many items in the store are free. The first FME Desktop component we'll examine is FME Workbench. Workbench is an application for creating graphic-based solutions to data translation and transformation requirements. It can handle both the geometry and the attributes of spatial features. To start FME Workbench, click on the Start button, Programs, FME Desktop, and select FME Workbench. Keep in mind the first time you open up FME Workbench, it may take it a few moments to retrieve a license if you've just freshly installed it. Before using Workbench, there are a number of key windows which are worth being familiar with. The main graphic window, which you see here, is the canvas. This is where a user defines their translations in the form of a flowchart-like setting, where connections between each item represent the flow of data. The canvas is usually tabbed with the Start tab, which we'll talk about later on. Below the canvas, we have the Translation Log window. This displays a report on translation results, including errors, warnings, and statistics on the number of features processed. The log window is also tabbed with the Help button, or Help window. On the left-hand side, we have the Navigator window and the Transformer gallery. The Navigator window is an Explorer-like tool which displays all of the settings and parameters which can be applied within the translation. The Transformer gallery is a window for the location and selection of different transformation tools. Anything which you select in the Transformer gallery, there'll be further information about that in the Help window. There's also some windows which are not turned on by default. You can find those under View Windows. Some of the more useful ones, the Overview window. The Overview window shows a view of the entire canvas. This is very useful for larger, more complex translations. Another very useful window is the Feature Type Connections window. This can be used to connect many items into a transformer, or take a transformer and connect it to something else, which is perhaps far apart on the canvas. Back in the manual, there's additional information about Windows on page 23. On page 24, it talks about how you can reorganize all of the windows in Workbench by dragging and dropping them. When you grab a window and drag it, you can either stack it with another window, or you can tab it if you hover it over another window, and then it becomes tabbed. You can also move these windows to other monitors if you so desire. There's a Q&A which you can work through if you like. That brings us to page 26, setting up a translation. So in a moment, we'll be doing a quick translation in exercise 1A. When creating your initial workspace, you can use either the dialog or the wizard. We'll be sticking to the dialog for this course. The quickest way to get to the dialog is on the Start tab. You can click on the Generate Workspace link. Once you've filled in the Generate Workspace dialog and hit OK, FME will read in the source data set and present you with a list of layers to use for the initial translation script definition. That's the Features Type dialog, and it looks like this. Once you've selected the source layers that you want for your translation script, the workspace will be created using those source layer definitions for the destination layer definitions. It will end up looking like this. Running the translation that you create is typically done by pressing the green play button, this button right here, or by pressing F5. You should save your workspace as soon as you can by clicking on the Save button. Saving your workspace makes recovering from unexpected issues like a power outage easier. There is a recovery file that is created once you save your workspace. When you run your workspace, a log window at the bottom will give you feedback as to what FME is doing. If there are any error messages, you'll find them there. Here's an example of a log file on page 31. The most important lines are towards the end. Look for translation was successful with and 0 or more warnings. Take a note of how many warnings there were and how many features were output. It's typically a good idea to review the log file to find those warnings and evaluate whether or not they warrant additional action on your part. Now let's see all of this in practice by doing exercise 1A on page 32 of your PDF file. The goal here is to create a workspace that translates zoning data in MapInfo tab format to an AutoCAD DWG file. So in our Workbench workspace, click on the Generate Workspace link. This will bring up the Generate Workspace dialog. Now we can choose the reader format. The easiest way to do that is just to start typing in the name of the format. If I type in MapInfo, I can see all of the MapInfo formats, and we'll be using the My Tab reader. For the data set, we'll click the three-dot button and locate our data set, which is in C FME Data 2014 Data Zoning zones.tab file. So I have my FME Data 2014. On my computer, I have a shortcut to C FME Data 2014 Data Zoning, and I have my zones.tab file. It's a good idea to get into the habit of checking your reader and writer parameters. For the most part today, there won't be much to check. We'll leave the rest of this alone. We'll be talking about it later. Our writer format, DWG. These are all the DWG formats. We'll just choose the Autodesk AutoCAD DWG DXF writer. And now we'll choose an output location. Again, C FME Data 2014. Output, training, and I'll type in the name of the output file, zones.dwg. I'll hit OK. It will now read in my source data set. It doesn't bring up the feature types to read dialog because this only has a single feature type. So it immediately creates the workspace. Here's my source feature type and the attributes. And for my writer, it's created a destination feature type definition with the same name and the same attribute names. The very first thing you should do when you've created your Workbench workspace is save it. So I'll save this as exercise 1A. And then I can run my translation by pressing the green play button. In the log file here, I can see translation was successful with 0 warnings. 416 features were output. So on to page 33 of the manual. Data inspection. We've just translated our data from one format to another. but we've never inspected the data. Inspecting your data before, during, and after the translation is a helpful way to verify that the process is operating as expected. Ultimately, data inspection is simply the act of looking at your data. Is it what you expect it to be? It is important to be able to check your geometry, symbology, attributes, data format, schema, and data quantity. The FME Data Inspector is a simple viewer that can display any data supported by FME, vector data, raster data, and non-spatial data. It is the default viewer for FME 2014. It is important to note that the Data Inspector cannot edit data or create cartographic output. It is not a GIS, and this is on purpose. We don't want to compete with the GIS companies. The Data Inspector is started in the usual way. Go to the Start button, Programs, FME Desktop, and here's the FME Data Inspector. So we'll start that up. And I'll just quickly add some data to this. I don't know the format which I'm going to grab, so I'm just going to let it guess from the data set. FME data, let's go with the parks. It's a parks.tab file. It guesses that it's a map info file. I hit OK, and it reads the data in. There we go. Okay. So we can see a similar view here on page 35. So once you've loaded some data, it looks like this. There is a menu bar and toolbar that contains a number of tools for opening data, zooming, querying, etc. The typical tools of most GIS applications, keeping in mind that the FME Data Inspector is not a GIS. Below that we have the View window, which will show the data that you've loaded and allow you to select specific features. You can select individual features, or you can click and drag a fence to select multiple features. We'll also see that in the table view down here. The Display Control window on the left-hand side allows you to turn layers on or off. Or if you have multiple data sets, you can reorganize your data sets, and within those data sets, you can also reorganize the individual layers, and that will change the display order. When you've selected a feature, everything FME knows about that feature will be shown in the Feature Information window. The information window shows all of the properties, including the coordinate system. If the coordinate system is defined here, you can click on its link and see the complete coordinate system definition. There's also information about the dimensions, the bounding box. Anytime you see a coordinate pair like this, you can click on that and it'll drop a pin in that location. Below the properties, we have the attributes. These include the user-defined attributes, as well as what we call format attributes. Format attributes are attributes that FME creates on the fly when the data is being read in. It's used to store additional information about these features. Typically things like styling information, file locations, things like that. Below the attribute section, there's the geometry section. Shows you all the geometry information for this particular feature. And again, if there's a coordinate pair, you can click on it and it'll drop a pin. That can be useful. Here you can see that this particular polygon starts at this location. And if we start moving this around, you can see that it is in fact digitized or captured in a counterclockwise direction. At the bottom, tabbed with the log window, is the table view. If I've selected multiple items in my view window, they'll all be highlighted in the table view, and the particular feature which is selected will have a slightly different color. I can also tab through them up here with a little forward and backward button. You'll notice that it shows you which one I've selected in the table view, and also that particular feature will flash briefly in the view window. I can also select features here, and they'll be selected in the view window as well, and that selected feature will also be in the feature information window. Notice that the table view only shows you your user-defined attributes. All those additional format attributes that FME creates are only available in the feature information window. The log window gives you feedback about the data as it is loaded. If something goes wrong with the reading of the data, FME will tell you here, and if you're lucky, tell you how to fix the problem. Also, results from queries and measurement tools will appear here as well when you use them. For example, if I use the distance measuring tool to measure a distance, I'll see that distance appear here in the log. I'm getting a few error messages here. My background map isn't working properly at the moment. We'll be fixing that momentarily. So back to the manual. There's additional information about these various windows on page 35 and 36, which brings us to page 37. Here you'll find details about opening and adding data sets in the viewer or in the data inspector. The difference between opening and adding is that opening will open up a new tab, while adding, this button here, or File Add Dataset, adds the dataset to the current tab. The tabs are completely independent. What you do in one tab will not affect the other tabs. The toolbar also has the zoom and pan tools. These allow you to pan around your view. The middle mouse button will do the same thing. So you can use that if you have the information tool selected. You can also zoom out and zoom in, or zoom to a selected feature. If I have selected a feature, I can zoom specifically to that, like so, or zoom to the extents. You can also zoom in and out using your scroll wheel, or if you hit the Shift key, that's zoom in, and the Control key is zoom out. You can also find the measurement tool here. Again, click and drag, and that will measure a distance. Keep in mind that you can only measure from point A to point B. There's no ability to continually measure around a perimeter. On page 40, there's a quick review of the feature information window. Again, if you select a feature with the I button, the information window shows you all of the information that FME has on that feature, its properties, attributes, and geometry. If the feature you're trying to view has no geometry, you would not be able to select it in the view window. There's another I button right here, this button here. This will select all features that have no geometry, and then you can tab through them if necessary, or review them in the table view. The Data Inspector also allows you to specify a background map. The background maps can be turned on under Tools, FME Options. So here under the options, I can select another background map. The Stamen ones don't seem to be working for me today, so I will try the MapQuest ones. Let's go with OpenStreetMap. Hit OK, and OK, and I hit OK again. It's very important to keep in mind that the background maps will only appear in tabs that you've opened after activating the background maps. They will not show up in existing tabs. So I will open up a new tab. I'll use the same data set. Another important consideration is the coordinate system. The data that you're opening up has to be coordinate system aware. Either that information is stored in the file itself, as it is with the map info file and with most GIS formats, or you specify the coordinate system manually. That can be a required step if you're reading in any of the CAD formats. They typically do not store coordinate system information. I'll open this up, and now I should get a background map. There we go. You can see it here. You can turn it on or off if it's cluttering your view. Back to the manual. Information on page 42, making sure you set your coordinate system. While you're working through this training manual, assume, unless otherwise stated, the coordinate system for the data is UTM-83-10. So that's UTM NAD83 Zone 10. Now let's take a look at exercise 1B on page 43. So we're going to inspect the output from the previous translation. Easiest way to do that is to click the Open Dataset button. So we'll open the dataset, and we stored that data. Actually, make sure you set your formats first. That can cause problems. If you go straight to here, you wouldn't be able to see the tab file or the DWG file because it's filtering on the format you've selected. So always clear this. You can either enter the format or have FME try to guess it from the extension that you select. So that data is being stored in FME Data 2014, Output, Training, and here's our zones.dwg file. We can now open that up. You can check parameters. With the CAD-based formats, there's usually a large number of parameters which will affect how data is being read or displayed. And we can set a coordinate system if necessary. CAD formats tend not to have coordinate system information. If I leave that unknown and open this up, notice that I don't see the background map. That's because the universal viewer, the data inspector, used to be called the universal viewer, is unaware of what coordinate system is being used for this data set. I can quickly correct that by opening up a new tab, and this time setting my coordinate system, UTM 83-10. Here we go. So that's exactly what we see. That brings us to page 45. Let's talk a little bit more about display control. So in the display control window, the data you have opened will be listed by dataset with the layers within that dataset. You can reorder the datasets, and you can reorder the layers within those datasets by dragging them up or down. And this changes the display order. Note that you cannot move a layer from one dataset up above another data set. You have to move the data sets first. You can turn the layers on or off by clicking on the check boxes. So I can turn off my entire view, individual data sets, and individual feature types, or the layers. You can also change the styling of the layers and the layer colors by clicking on the style icon, which is the little 4-quadrant square. Keep in mind that you should not use the FME Data Inspector to create pretty output. Applications like ArcMap should be used for that. This is not a GIS or cartographic tool. Only go through the effort of changing the style if it's going to help you inspect your data or troubleshoot a translation. On page 47, there's a list of miscellaneous viewer functionality. When you have the cursor in the view window, holding down the shift or control keys will change the pointer to a zoom in or zoom out tool. Some additional functionality, the save tools. Under File, you can save data as, which will save all the data sets in the current tab out to a format of your choosing. If you just want a subset of the data, you can select the data in your view by clicking and dragging a fence. And then you can save that selected data out to another format. This is handy for creating smaller test data sets. That'll allow you to run your test translations more quickly. Also under Tools, there's a Filter Features. There's also a button on the toolbar for that here. This allows you to set a test clause for your data. Only the data that passes the test will be visible in the display. Let's work through exercise 1C on page 49 of the manual. The overall goal here, we're going to examine data in a number of different data sets and select a suitable neighborhood to live in. Basically, this is really just to familiarize yourself with the FME Data Inspector. So in the Data Inspector, if you've not already done so, start it up and then set a background. Again, to do that, it's under Tools, FME Options, and we have the background map format. We can change that back to the Stamen maps. I'm kind of a fan of the watercolor myself. And then I can hit OK. Keep in mind that will only affect the new tabs that we create. In the manual here, it had you choose the MapQuest Web Map Tile Service, but you can really choose any background you map that you prefer, so you can experiment with that a little bit. Let's add some data. Step number 3. So we'll go up to File, Open Dataset, and we're going to add in a Google Earth KML file from FME Data 2014 Data Boundaries VancouverNeighborhoods.kml. So we'll select this, choose our source format, KML, choose our data set, click the 3-dot button here, FME Data 2014 Data Boundaries VancouverNeighborhoods.kml. Hit open, hit OK. And you can see the data here. I'm just going to take my feature information window here. I'm going to move this over my display control. That'll be tabbed. It gives me a bit more of a view here. So, okay, so now we've added it in. We can see it overlapping our watercolor map. So here you can see it's a solid fill color and therefore obscures the background data. We can fix that. Page 51, let's change the symbology for the neighborhoods layer. We'll click on the 4-quadrant square here. That'll open up the drawing style option. From here, we can choose a new color, perhaps orange, and we can set a transparency as well. So if I dial that down, if I hit the apply button, you can see that change what's on my map or in my view. When I'm happy with what I have, I can hit OK. That brings us to step number 5, adding more data. So the mayor has a pet dog and therefore wishes to live in a neighborhood that has a dog park. We must therefore add some parks data to the view. So we'll go to File, Add Data Set, and we will read in a MyTab file. And the file itself is FME Data 2014 Data Parks, parks.tab. So that is FME Data 2014 Data Parks. And I have the parks.tab file. That brings in my parks. Now this shows me all the parks. I'll want to filter so that I only see the dog parks. In my table view down here, I can see each of the data sets, actually each of the feature types that I've listed up here in display control are also down here. Document, folder, neighborhoods. I have my 6 neighborhoods, which it shows me. And my parks. You can sort here by clicking on the attribute name, so I can see that there are a number of dog parks. And I'll want to only show those ones here in my view. The way that I can do that is going up to Tools, Filter Features, or clicking on the Filter Features icon, or tool. That brings up this Test Clause window. So now I want to test. I can choose an attribute value. I can see all of the attributes that are in my data sets. I want to test dog park. Also, this is a case-sensitive search as well. If I do capital D, there I can see my dog park. OG. And then the operator equals, and the right value, capital Y. Keep in mind, FME is almost always case-sensitive. Hit OK, and it just shows my dog parks. If I go back to my display window, turn off my background map, there it's a bit clearer. I can see my dog parks. Now one thing you'll notice here is that I also can't see anything else. My neighborhoods, those do not contain an attribute called dog park, so they naturally fail the test. If I wanted to see my neighborhoods, I'll have to add a test that they will pass. I can do that by adding an additional test. I'll click on this filter button again. Capital N. I'm going to test on my neighborhood ID. Neighborhood ID. And I'll just make an arbitrary test is greater than 0. All of the neighborhoods have a neighborhood ID, so they should all pass that test. When I click OK, I can see that I have my neighborhoods back. So now it looks like this. I can see my dog parks, and I can see the neighborhoods that those dog parks are in. Okay, so the mayor's dog is his best friend, and he refuses to live in an area where there's no rescue services. So we need to find some rescue services, the emergency services. Those are specifically the fire halls. So let's add another data set. So I'll add a data set. This is a GML file. And the data set itself is FME Data 2014 Data Emergency, and I have a Firehall's GML. So I'll open that up, hit OK, and it will read in the GML file. Oops, I hit the wrong button there. I click the Add Data, Open Data instead of Add Data. If you do make a mistake like that, it's quick and easy to recover from it. Just go back to the previous tab. When you click Add or Open again, the dialog here will remember the most recently used data set. So I can just hit OK, and that'll bring in my firehalls into this view. Okay, let's see if I can spot those firehalls. We don't see the firehalls. The reason for that, once again, our filter. The filter is immediately filtering out those firehalls. Keep that in mind. If you have the filter turned on and adding additional data sets, you may not see them. So let's go into our filter again. Now we're going to add an attribute which is on or in the GML file, rescue. We'll set that to equals yes. And now we can see all of our fire departments. Scroll around a little bit here. So you can see really the only one that has it in the same neighborhood is this neighborhood right here. That has a dog park and a fire hall. If you want to save this information out, I could select those features and save that data out to something else. So, a quick review, we've set a background map, we've opened a data set for inspection, we've added additional data to the same view, we've set the symbology, so we set the colors and the transparency for our neighborhoods. We've queried and sorted data in the table view. We did that with the dog parks just to see that there are some with yes. And we filtered data using the filtering tool. This brings us to page 57 in the manual, translation previews. While FME Workbench does not display data, you can pass data from Workbench to the FME Data Inspector. The most basic way to do this is using the Redirect to Inspection Application option under the Writer's menu. You can see that right here, Redirect to Inspection Application. Redirect to Inspection Application means that when a translation is run in Workbench, the output will be redirected to the FME Data Inspector. This means that no output will actually be written. All output goes directly to the Data Inspector. This is really useful if your destination is a database. If you're running test translations into a database, you'll have a lot of junk data to clean up later. If you redirect to Inspection Application, you can check the output first and make sure that it is what you actually want. And then when you're happy with the output, you can turn off the Redirect to Inspection Application and then translate directly into your database. So again, that's under Writers, Redirect to Inspection Application. When I turn that on and run my existing workspace here, instead of creating my zones AutoCAD file, it is sent directly to the Data Inspector instead. Also, back in Workbench in the log window, instead of having 0 warnings, I now have 5 warnings, and it tells me that I have 0 features output. The 5 warnings, these are the blue lines right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, telling me that all writer output has been redirected to the inspector. And that brings to an end Chapter 1. There's a modular review. Please take the time to review that. See if there's anything that I've missed. There is an exercise at the end of Chapter 1. Let's work through that together. That's exercise 1D. So in this exercise, imagine that you are a GIS technician working for a city planning department. The local tourist bureau is running a promotion where they provide tourists with a GPS device to help them visit street food vendors in the city. You've been asked to produce the data to be used in this scheme. So step number 1, make sure that you have Workbench open. We can then go to the Start tab. We're going to create a new workspace using the Generate Workspace option. Be careful when choosing your source and destination formats. FME will remember the most recently used formats and data sets that you've specified. Start at the top and work your way down. It's always a good idea to set your format before trying to choose your data set. Our source format is going to be GeoDatabase, and it is the File GeoDB API. We now choose our GeoDatabase file. Brings up a slightly different view here. This is because file geodatabases aren't really a file, it's actually a folder with an extension. So it can be a little different when selecting them. Here you can see that it is in fact a folder, but if I double click on this, that should work just fine. Next up, we're going to choose our writer format. Garmin POI. And our output, C FME Data 2014 Output Training. And we can just rename it right here, foodvendors.csv. That should be sufficient. So what you have here should match what you see on page 62 of the manual. That all looks good. We'll click OK. This time, FME will read in that file geodatabase, find all the tables that are present within it, and then we can choose which ones we actually want. I can either uncheck all the ones that I don't want, or uncheck the select all, and then just select the one which I do want, the food vendors. Once I've selected the one that I want, I can click OK. Now you'll notice that the initial workspace is slightly different than what we had last time. In the previous example, when I created my initial workspace, I had my zones and zones. In this case, the Garmin POI writer, it expects a specific feature type name, waypoints, so that is not automatically connected. So the first thing that we should do is connect that. That's step number 2. Actually, the very first thing you should do is save your workspace. Always a good idea to save your workspace. Exercise 1D. Now let's connect our reader to our writer. Easiest way to do that, hover your mouse over the output port. It'll have a little blue shading around it. You then click, and then put the mouse over where you want it to connect it to, and click again. And that will connect it up. You can also just click and drag. That'll work as well. Next up, if we click the little down arrow here, we can see all of our source attributes. And if I click here, we'll see all of our destination attributes. You'll see that all of these are yellow, meaning they exist on the source data set, but FME does not know where they're going to be written to. Over here, we can see the red triangles. That means that they exist in the destination definition, but FME does not know where it's going to get the values from. To deal with that, we have to do some attribute mapping. We want to map vendor name to name and vendor description to description. That's as easy as clicking on the output port and then clicking on the input port. Same thing that we did with the feature types. Keep in mind you have to do the feature type connection first, then you can do the attribute mapping. So we've mapped that, and then we run the workspace. We've written it out. Translation was successful with 0 warnings. 91 features output. Further up in the log file here, you can also see the features read summary and the features written. You can see that we read in 91 features and wrote out 91 features. Now to inspect the data, we can either go hunt down that data from the data inspector, or there's some shortcuts within Workbench we can use as well. If we've gone to Writer's Redirect to Inspection application, it would send the output directly to the data inspector. Keep in mind that it would not create the Garmin POI files. If you do create the Garmin POI files, you can inspect them by either right-clicking on the writer in the navigator. If I right-click here, there's Inspect. Or I can right-click on the feature type itself on the canvas. I can right-click on that and choose Inspect, which is what it has in the manual here on page 64. So I'll choose Inspect. It guesses the format. Hit OK. And there we are. I can see all the various points. My display control, remember, is currently tabbed with my feature information. So I can turn off my background map, and here's all my points. So let's do a quick filter to find hot dog vendors. To do the filter, click on the filter button. And we can do the description equals hot dogs. And that'll show me all the hot dogs. Also in the log, it'll tell me how many passed and how many failed that test. Or at least it should. It's not immediately jumping out at me. It's probably buried in there somewhere. Anyway, so here's my hot dogs. Keep in mind that if you use the equals, this is case sensitive. It has to be exactly hot dogs. Capital H, capital D. Hot dog would not pass. If you want something a bit more flexible, you can use something like the contains. Here I could do a test for just dog. Doesn't even have to be case sensitive. In fact, these operators here, these are all SQL-based operators. These operators here, because they're SQL operators, are not case sensitive. This is pretty much the only thing in FME which is not case sensitive. All other times, assume case sensitive. There we go. Same features pass the test. If I select a bunch of them here, I can see those are all the hot dogs. And if I turn on my background map, I can even see where they are. Sometimes you have to zoom in or zoom out just to get the background maps to show up again. So that's the end of Chapter 1. In Chapter 2, we'll be taking a look at data transformation.